As Jesus breathed his final breath, the world did not continue as usual. At the very hour when the sun should have stood at its brightest, an unnatural darkness fell across the land. From noon until mid-afternoon, light seemed to withdraw, as if creation itself paused in reverence and shock. This was not a passing cloud, not a sudden storm, and not a coincidence of nature. It was a moment that demanded attention, a silence heavy with meaning, signaling that something far greater than a single death was unfolding. Ancient witnesses struggled to explain what they were seeing. Passover took place during a full moon, making a solar eclipse impossible. Yet the darkness remained, pressing down on the city and the hearts of those watching. In the scriptures of Israel, darkness at midday was never meaningless. It was a sign of divine judgment, a warning that history had reached a turning point. Prophets had spoken of such a day centuries earlier, and now, beneath a darkened sky, those words seemed to come alive. Imagine standing in Jerusalem at that moment. The crowds grew quiet. Laughter faded. Even the soldiers kept their eyes fixed on the sky. Time itself felt suspended as the world bore witness to a sacrifice that would change everything. This darkness did not speak of defeat, but of fulfillment. It marked the moment when judgment and mercy met, when prophecy and reality collided in a single, unforgettable hour. This is not just a story from the past. It is an invitation to look deeper, to listen closely, and to understand why this moment still echoes across centuries. If you are ready to uncover the meaning behind these extraordinary events and explore what they reveal about faith, history, and redemption, stay with us. If this story draws you in, support the channel by liking the video, subscribing for more powerful storytelling, and turning on notifications so you never miss what comes next. Your support helps keep these stories alive. As the unnatural darkness slowly lifted and the sky began to release its grip on Jerusalem, another event unfolded far from the hill of crucifixion, hidden within the heart of the temple. While most eyes were fixed on the cross, an unseen drama was taking place behind stone walls and sacred courts, a moment that would redefine the relationship between God and humanity. At the exact instant Jesus released his final breath, a sound tore through the holy sanctuary, not the cry of a man, but the violent ripping of the temple veil. This veil was no ordinary curtain. It stood as the most powerful symbol of separation in the spiritual life of Israel, towering high and woven thick, guarding the Holy of Holies where the presence of God was believed to dwell. For generations, it had declared a single truth. Access was forbidden. Only the high priest could pass beyond it, and only once a year. Carrying sacrificial blood as a temporary covering for sin, the veil reminded everyone that humanity, burdened by imperfection, could not stand freely before divine holiness. Yet in one decisive moment, that ancient boundary gave way. The veil was torn from top to bottom, a detail that spoke louder than words. No human hand could have reached from above. No priest could have planned or prevented it. The direction of the tear pointed unmistakably toward divine action, as if heaven itself had reached down to remove the barrier it had once required. What centuries of ritual and sacrifice could never achieve was accomplished in a single breath on the cross. The timing was impossible to ignore. As Jesus died under a darkened sky, bearing the weight of judgment described by the prophets, the symbol of separation inside the temple was destroyed. These events were not isolated signs but parts of a single message unfolding across the city. The darkness had signaled that judgment was taking place, and now the torn veil revealed its purpose. The sacrifice was complete. Nothing more was required. For the priests who served that day, the moment must have been deeply unsettling. Their entire calling revolved around preserving the sanctity of what lay behind that veil. Suddenly, the structure that defined their role and authority was gone, leaving the most sacred space exposed. The sound of tearing fabric would have echoed not only through the temple halls but through their understanding of God, worship, and access to the divine. What had once been distant and restricted was now open, not through ritual effort, but through a completed sacrifice. This act did not diminish holiness, it transformed it. The tearing of the veil did not suggest that the divine presence had left the temple, but that the path to that presence had changed forever. No longer would access depend on lineage, ceremony, or repeated offerings. The sacrifice on the cross had accomplished what the veil once symbolized but could never resolve. Separation had given way to invitation. Seen together with the darkness that preceded it, the torn veil stands as a powerful turning point. One revealed the weight of judgment being carried, the other revealed the door that judgment had opened. The cross was not the tragic end of a righteous man, but the moment when distance was replaced with nearness, and fear with hope. What was once hidden behind layers of fabric and law was now made accessible through a single act of obedience and love, marking the beginning of a new chapter in the story of humanity. As the veil fell in silence within the temple, the world outside refused to remain still. The same moment that shattered the boundary between the divine and humanity sent a violent response through the ground beneath Jerusalem. The earth shook with sudden force. Rocks split apart, and the city trembled as though it could no longer bear the weight of what had just taken place. What began with darkness in the sky and continued with the tearing of the veil now reached deep into the foundations of the land itself, binding heaven, temple, and earth into a single unfolding declaration. This was not the gentle rumble of a passing tremor. Witnesses felt the ground convulse beneath their feet. Stone structures groan, and ancient rock formations fracture without warning. Jerusalem had known earthquakes before, yet this one arrived with a precision that defied chance. It struck at the exact moment Jesus died, as though creation itself responded to the final breath of the one it had been formed through. The timing transformed the quake from a natural disturbance into a message written into the earth. Throughout the sacred writings of Israel, earthquakes were never empty events. They marked moments when God revealed his presence, moments of judgment, covenant, and transformation. And formation, mountains had trembled when the law was given, and prophets spoke of the earth shaking when divine authority was revealed. On this day, those ancient images stepped out of memory and into lived experience. The ground beneath Jerusalem became a witness, testifying that something irreversible had occurred. The violence of the shaking mirrored the spiritual upheaval unfolding at the same time. Systems that had stood for centuries were being undone. The old order, built on repeated sacrifice and guarded distance, was collapsing under the weight of fulfillment. Just as rocks split open, long-standing assumptions about access to God and the structure of worship were breaking apart. The quake did not destroy randomly. It revealed instability in what once seemed unshakable. For those caught in its grip, fear was unavoidable. Crowds who had gathered with confidence felt certainty drain away as the earth moved beneath them. Soldiers trained to face danger without hesitation found themselves shaken in ways battle had never achieved. Priests, already stunned by the tearing of the veil, would have felt the ground beneath the temple tremble, reinforcing the sense that authority no longer rested where they believed it did. The city itself seemed to recoil, as if acknowledging that it stood at the center of a moment far greater than political power or religious control. Yet the earthquake was not only a sign of collapse. Within its violence lay a deeper promise. The breaking of rock and stone hinted that death itself was being challenged. Tombs were disturbed, and the rigid boundary between life and death began to crack, just as the barrier between God and humanity had already fallen. The earth's reaction pointed forward as much as it pointed back, foreshadowing that the story unfolding was not one of defeat, but of transformation. Seen alongside the darkness and the torn veil, the earthquake completes a pattern. The sky responded, the sanctuary responded, and now the land responded. Each layer of creation bore witness that the moment of the cross was not isolated or insignificant. It was the center point where judgment, mercy, and renewal converged. The trembling ground proclaimed that the world could not remain the same after what had taken place. When the shaking finally subsided, Jerusalem stood altered, even if its buildings remained. The earth had spoken in a language older than words, declaring that the old had passed and something new had begun. What seemed like chaos was, in truth, a sign of reordering. The ground that trembled beneath the city carried the message forward through history, reminding every generation that the moment of the cross was not only seen and heard, but felt by the very foundations of the world. As the earth slowly settled after its violent shaking, the signs did not end. What had begun in the heavens with darkness, continued in the temple with the torn veil, and echoed through the land with a powerful earthquake now reached into the realm humanity feared most. Death itself was no longer untouched. Beneath the city, within sealed graves that had long symbolized finality and silence, something extraordinary occurred. Tombs were opened, not by human hands, but by the same force that had shaken stone and split rock. The boundary that had always stood firm between the living and the dead began to give way. Jerusalem was already overwhelmed by fear and confusion when whispers spread of graves no longer holding their occupants. These were not nameless figures or strangers from distant places. They were known, remembered, and honored. Scripture describes them as holy people, men and women who had lived faithfully and were mourned long ago. Their return was not chaotic or monstrous, but purposeful and restrained, carrying meaning rather than spectacle. In a city trembling with signs, this became the most unsettling and hopeful moment of all. What makes this event even more striking is its timing. The tombs were opened at the moment of Jesus' death, yet those raised did not appear openly until after his resurrection. This detail binds the entire story together with deliberate clarity. The darkness had signaled judgment. The torn veil had revealed access. The earthquake had announced collapse and renewal. And now the opened tombs pointed forward. They declared that death had been wounded, but its final defeat would follow. Jesus' resurrection would stand at the center, the turning point around which all life would now revolve. For the people of Jerusalem, the implications were impossible to ignore. Death was not a distant idea to them. Tombs lined the hillsides, reminders of loss, grief, and the limits of human hope. To see those limits broken, to encounter faces thought lost forever walking the streets again, would have shattered every assumption about what was possible. This was not merely a miracle. It was a revelation. The grave, once seen as the ultimate authority, had been challenged in the most direct way. The raised saints did not appear in secret or remain hidden. They entered the city itself, the very place that had witnessed the condemnation and death of Jesus. Their presence transformed familiar streets into living testimony. Families, neighbors, and former mourners were confronted with a truth they could not easily dismiss. These appearances were not rumors passed quietly, but encounters that demanded explanation. The same city that had watched Jesus die now faced undeniable evidence that his death had released a power stronger than decay and time. This moment reached deep into the collective memory of Israel's scriptures. Long before, prophets had spoken of God breathing life into what was dry and lifeless, of restoration that went beyond metaphor. Those ancient visions now stood embodied in flesh and breath. What had once been hoped for in distant promises was stepping into the present, signaling that resurrection was no longer only a future expectation, but a reality already breaking into the world. Seen within the unfolding sequence of events, the opened tombs complete a powerful progression. Darkness revealed judgment. The veil revealed reconciliation. The earthquake revealed transformation. And the raised saints revealed victory. Each sign built upon the last, guiding witnesses toward a single conclusion. The cross was not the end of hope, but its doorway. Death had not claimed the final word. It had been forced to loosen its grip. The raised holy ones were not the conclusion of the story, but its preview. Their return served as a promise written in human form, pointing toward a future where resurrection would not be limited to a few, but extended to all who belong to Christ. In that moment, amid fear and wonder, the message became unmistakable. What had been lost would be restored, what had been broken would be renewed, and death itself would no longer reign unchallenged. As the signs unfolded one after another, their impact reached not only the sky, the temple, the earth, and the tombs, but also the human heart. Standing near the cross was a man trained to suppress emotion, a Roman centurion whose life had been shaped by discipline, command, and repeated exposure to death. For him, crucifixion was not a moral crisis or a moment of reflection. It was routine, a duty carried out in service of empire. Yet this execution was unlike any he had overseen before, and the events surrounding it stripped away every layer of detachment he had learned to rely on. He had watched the darkness descend in the middle of the day, an unsettling silence replacing the noise of the crowd. He had felt the ground shake beneath his feet with a force that could not be ignored. He likely heard the confusion ripple through the city as the temple veil was torn and tombs were disturbed. None of these signs fit within the world he understood, a world governed by order, power, and the authority of Rome. Each moment pressed against his certainty, demanding that he reconsider the man hanging before him. What may have struck him most was not only what happened around Jesus, but how Jesus himself faced death. There was no frantic struggle, no curse hurled at the sky, no desperate attempt to escape. His final words carried a calm authority that stood in stark contrast to every execution the centurion had witnessed. Even in death, Jesus appeared to be in command, surrendering his life rather than having it taken. This quiet strength unsettled a man accustomed to seeing fear and resistance break even the strongest prisoners. As the signs converged, something shifted within the centurion. The darkness, the trembling earth, and the strange stillness that followed did not feel like random disturbances. They felt like responses. It was as if the world itself was reacting to the one being crucified, bearing witness in a way no human testimony could. In that realization, the centurion was forced to confront a truth that challenged everything he served and believed. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of transformation. Declaring that Jesus was truly the Son of God was not a casual statement or a poetic reflection. For a Roman officer, trained to honor the gods of the empire and the authority of Caesar, such a confession marked a profound shift in allegiance. It acknowledged that the power displayed at the cross surpassed military strength, political control, and imperial pride. This was a recognition born not from teaching or tradition, but from direct encounter. His confession stands in striking contrast to the responses around him. Religious leaders, Sophia, armed with knowledge and status, struggled to accept what was unfolding. Crowds wavered between fear and remorse. Yet this soldier, an outsider to Israel's promises and prophecies, recognized what many refused to see. The truth broke through not because of his background, but because his heart, hardened by years of violence, was finally shaken. This moment draws together all that had come before. The darkness revealed judgment, the torn veil revealed access, the earthquake revealed transformation, the open tombs revealed victory, and now a human voice gave testimony to their meaning. Creation had spoken, history had shifted, and at last, a witness responded. The centurion's words bridged the cosmic and the personal, reminding us that the signs were not only meant to be observed, but to be received. In that confession, the story turns inward. The cross was not only altering the structure of the world, it was changing lives in real time. If a man tasked with overseeing death could recognize life standing before him, then no heart was beyond reach. The centurion's declaration remains one of the most powerful moments of the crucifixion narrative. not because it came from a position of faith, but because it came from confrontation with undeniable truth. As the echoes of that extraordinary day slowly faded, Jerusalem was left divided. The signs had been undeniable. The sky had darkened. The ground had shaken. The veil had been torn. Tombs had opened. And even a Roman centurion had spoken words that changed his life forever. Yet the responses of the people could not have been more different. Some walked away from Golgotha with trembling hearts, overcome by remorse and fear, sensing that they had witnessed something far greater than an execution. Others, particularly those who held power and authority, chose a very different path. Among the crowd were men and women who had mocked only hours earlier. Now, the weight of what they had seen pressed heavily on them. Scripture describes how they beat their chests and left in silence, a visible sign of regret and inner turmoil. Their confidence had collapsed. Laughter had turned to sorrow. Many began to realize that they had not stood against a powerless man, but against the very one sent by God. For some, this remorse would later grow into repentance and faith, shaping the beginnings of a movement that would spread far beyond Jerusalem. Yet not everyone allowed the signs to change them. The religious leaders, despite seeing the same darkness, feeling the same earthquake, and hearing reports of the torn veil and opened tombs, chose denial. To accept the truth would have meant admitting that they were wrong, that their authority was flawed, and that their control was slipping away. Rather than humbling themselves, they clung to power, reputation, and fear of losing influence. Evidence was explained away. Witnesses were silenced. Truth was buried beneath strategy and pride. This contrast reveals a timeless lesson. Miracles, no matter how overwhelming, do not force faith. Signs can shake the earth, but they cannot soften a heart that refuses to bend. The same events that led one man to confess Jesus as the Son of God drove others deeper into resistance. The difference was not what they saw, but how willing they were to be changed by it. That is why this story still speaks today. The events surrounding the death of Jesus were not recorded simply to inspire awe, but to confront every listener with a choice. Remorse can lead to transformation, but fear of losing control can harden even the most religious hearts. Power without humility becomes blindness. Knowledge without surrender becomes resistance. As this story comes to a close, it leaves us with a question that reaches far beyond ancient Jerusalem. When confronted with truth, do we open our hearts, or do we protect what we are afraid to lose? The crowd, the centurion, and the leaders all saw the same signs, yet walked away forever changed in very different ways. Their responses remind us that faith begins not with miracles, but with a willing heart. Thank you for taking the time to listen and journey through this powerful story. If this message resonated with you, please support the channel by liking the video, subscribing for more in-depth biblical storytelling, and turning on notifications so you do not miss future episodes. Your support helps keep these stories alive and shared with others who may need them.